Hi, and welcome to unPlanned, the show about cities and how they work. I'm Sam, your host, and today on unPlanned, we have the great pleasure of talking with Larry Chretien, the Executive Director of the Green Energy Consumers Alliance here in Massachusetts. They do a lot of advocacy work and other policy work, both here in Massachusetts and in Rhode Island. And they've come up with a wonderful program called Drive Green. We're really excited to talk to Larry, particularly about the impacts that COVID has had on the energy world, which have been profound. So before I introduce Larry, let me remind you to subscribe to unPlanned. We're going to have many more interesting conversations to come. But without further ado, Larry, I'd like to welcome you to unPlanned and thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks, Sam. I'm glad to be here, and I hope I can provide some insights that would be interesting to people.
No, I'm sure you will. So Larry, first, why don't you tell us, I always ask everybody, just give us a little bit of background about yourself and the organization you're running, and then we'll talk about the issues that are so important to all of us.
Yeah, well, the organization Green Energy Consumers Alliance we called it Mass Energy for a long time. We changed our name a couple of years ago. We're a private nonprofit that's based in Boston and Providence. And we have a mission to try to use consumers to speed up the transition to clean energy so that we can have a low carbon economy. The organization started way back in 1982 with a discount heating oil program to save people some money on that. So we're very pro-consumer, pro-environment. Today, our biggest program has to do with renewable energy. We help communities buy more renewable energy than required by state law. We've got the Drive Green program that's about electric cars, and we promote energy efficiency and a few other things. So
that's great, Larry. And yeah, I can testify you guys do amazing work. And frankly, I think the Drive Green program has been one of the great innovations over the last 4 or 5 years and it helped me get into a green car, full confession there.
Yeah.
Let's get into the COVID stuff. COVID has been fascinating. As I like to say, my background's in urban planning. I like to say to people, COVID allowed us to run the experiment we never thought we'd be able to run. What if we shut down an entire city for a whole day? And it kind of allowed us to do that. Terrible impacts, of course, but fascinating from a planning perspective. It's also had a huge impact on the energy world and the energy markets. And I know that you track all that stuff very closely. It's very important to you. Give us a little bit of a background as to what you've been seeing over the last month and a half in that world and kind of what some of the lessons you take from it.
Yeah, so the transition to clean energy hasn't materialized 100% yet, right? So we're still an economy that is overly dependent upon fossil fuels, particularly oil and natural gas. And so on the transportation side, that's where people have really seen a huge difference. COVID has shut down incredibly suddenly the use of gasoline and diesel fuel in cars, trucks, and airplanes. The airline industry is just essentially stuck on the tarmac. Something like less than 5% of the flights of a year ago, and so we're seeing that. We're seeing people staying at home and not driving, and so it's the oil prices were up over $50 a barrel, and now they went down into the teens, crude oil per barrel. And so that resulted in huge drops in gasoline and heating oil prices. For a couple of days, crude oil drillers had to pay negative prices for oil, meaning they had to actually pay someone to take it away for them. And so that shows you what can happen, as you said, what a weird experiment when you shut things down that severely, that quickly.
What do you take away from it all?
It's going to have huge impacts on foreign policy. I just can't wait for the day when we can think about energy and not have to think about how it's affecting one way or the other our relations with another country. And it just distorts the manner in which we think of ourselves within the world. But on the bright side, I think we're learning a little bit about how to get by with less petroleum consumption.
Can I ask you about and I don't know if this is an area you've done work in, but I suspect it probably is, the coal world. I believe I saw a headline the other day, maybe yesterday, saying that for the first time ever, renewables were providing more electricity than coal was. First time in the history of the United States, at any rate. What do you see on the coal side? Because coal is obviously one of the dirtier fuels out there. What's your perception of what's going on there?
Yeah, so coal is basically out of the mix here in New England. It has been for a couple of years. The only time we ever use coal in New England is on the very cold stretches of the winter and the hottest days in the summer. I think COVID's essentially accelerating the worldwide, and particularly in this country, our use of coal, accelerating the reduction of coal consumption because renewable energy just keeps increasing as a percentage of our mix every year because of policies and the markets. Wind power and solar power just continue to drop, even surprising people like us who are paying attention to this. Every year, we're hitting record low prices in terms of wind and solar production. And so that's eating away at coal, and natural gas has eaten away at coal as well.
Tell us about natural gas and where it stands today.
Natural gas prices are going down as a result of COVID, but yet consumption of it is going down far more. We're watching every day in New England. There's a website called ISO New England, and it's showing in real time the fact that natural gas consumption is down quite a bit in March and April compared to a year ago. So I don't want to be sanguine in saying that this is all good for the transition to clean energy, because when the price of something is low, eventually the market could rebound and consumption could rise. But I do think it gets back to sort of the experiment that you're referring to. It allows us all to try to envision how we can substitute clean energy for fossil fuels when demand falls.
What do you think is as we go forward? So we don't know the future of COVID. It seems like, at least locally, that's the Boston area, Massachusetts in general, it's at least the fear factor has stepped back a little bit. We don't know what's going to happen in the fall, and there's a lot of talk about restarting the economy, and that's a whole discussion unto itself with a whole lot of connected politics to it as well. What do you see happening on, I'll broadly call it the environmental side. It's the carbon side plus the energy consumption side plus the air quality side. What do you see happening in this region that seems to work together? The New England region wants to work together, I assume.
This is a huge teachable moment. I know you've probably followed this, but I want to bring watchers' attention to the fact that air quality in the world, and including in Boston, has dramatically improved since COVID. And that's because the dirtiest power plants are not being called upon because our overall consumption is low. We're burning less natural gas in the power plants, but the big kicker is there's less driving, and so the pollutants that come out of the tailpipe are far less than they were 2 months ago. And so at first it was showing itself in Italy, the air quality in Italy, which got hammered pretty quickly, as well as around Wuhan, China. We saw the skies clear. And then we're seeing the skies clear in the dirtiest cities in India. Well, now we're seeing that here in the United States. And so it's a teachable moment. This is the future that we can have when the economy recovers, and we're able to go back safely to work. We don't need to be burning as much petroleum to get around. We need to find ways of getting a big challenge that a lot of us are worrying about is public transportation is a great way to reduce air pollution, but it also now is concerning. A lot of people don't want to go on the MBTA because that's a way where you could catch COVID. And so what we need to find is how do we get the MBTA up and running to capacity in a way that's safe for commuters. And so I think that's going to take some time to figure out, but it just reinforces where our organization's all about, which is it's time to stop the diesel buses that the MBTA runs and that the schools have, and shift them to electric buses.
I wonder, we obviously could talk about this for hours and hours and hours. Unfortunately, our talks are limited to a certain number of minutes. So let me ask you in closing, what's one big takeaway as you go forward in your organizational professional life? What's something you're working on? And also, I'd also like to throw in there, what's one personal observation you've made during this time, maybe about you and your life and how things have changed over the last 6 to 8 weeks? It's been quite an upheaval for a lot of us.
Yeah.
I'm sure you've had a lot of thoughts about that part as well. But let's start with the professional side. What's one of the things you want to work on or you want to see happen coming out of this?
Well, we've been saying for a long time, but is the fact that transportation emissions for carbon dioxide have risen above every other sector of the economy. They're more than buildings, they're more than power generation. And so we've had that in our sights to try to reduce carbon emissions from transportation. What COVID and all this is telling us is that it's also a huge public health culprit. And so the Mass Attorney General's office just recently produced a report I can send to you, and maybe you can provide that link, but of talking about how the pollution from air pollutions really are hurting now we're seeing in COVID patients tend to be clustered in areas where air pollution has been the highest. And so there's a huge social justice, environmental justice, equity component to our energy consumption that we need to pay attention to. And so our organization is going to double down like a lot of other good groups. And we're going to say, you know what? There's multiple benefits to reducing petroleum consumption. It's the climate that affects the whole world, and then it can really affect the lives of people in disadvantaged communities. And we need to see how that affects us differently.
I just was going to jump in here. Yeah, that whole equity piece has become so clear. There's that aspect of the pollution component to it. There also is this big component of, who can afford to work from home and who has to go into a physical place, who's not necessarily an essential worker, but that's the only way they can make money. That whole equity piece, I think, is one of the big, takeaways coming out of all this. That we collectively have to really work on that. Now, on the personal side, what's just a personal observation you've had? It's certainly changed everybody's world.
What relates to what you just said, what I say to everyone right now is I'm counting my blessings. My organization is going to take a little bit of a hit financially as a result of COVID, but we'll get through it. And so I don't see us laying anybody off. We've got about 20 excellent employees. We're able to work in 20 different locations, and the staff have been great. My family's healthy. It makes me think about, it becomes obvious that I'm in a situation that is privileged.
Larry, I want to thank you for taking some time to talk about this crucial topic that is on everybody's mind, and I really appreciate all your insights. You do run an organization. Where can people find out more about who you are and what you do in your day job?
Yeah, greenenergyconsumers.org.